It is my theorem, if you wish, that any meaning and any value requires sacrifice. Therefore, unless you are ready to make a sacrifice, no meaning and no value could appear in your life. But luckily, it actually works both ways. So, if you are ready to make a sacrifice, then both meaning and value can appear in your life. Greetings, this is Eugene the Philosopher, the greatest living philosopher after the unfortunate passing of Quentin Robert D. Nameland, who has been the greatest living philosopher before me. Let's talk about sacrifice. I'll probably call this video, Let's Bring Back Sacrifice, alright? So we're onto something funny here at the very least. But to begin with, I want to talk about the history, okay? So if you look at what, for example, ancient Greeks have sacrificed, or pretty much any other polytheistic cults, I would assume, at the very least, those would be, for example, grain, wine, and domesticated animals. So those would be the things, or objects at the very least, which required effort to make. Which is kind of interesting. Like, for example, nobody sacrificed game that people acquired with hunting. You had to grow the animal you're sacrificing yourself, or you had to grow the grain, or, you know, the grape for the wine and make the wine yourself, etc., etc. So you only sacrifice things that required effort to make, right? So what was the point of that? What was this sacred, I guess, meaning of this? Well, it was, at least supposedly, according to some researchers, and I actually kind of agree with them, it was kind of the return those things into the void, at least partly, right? So the idea, apparently, at least supposedly, according to this hypothesis, was that we've taken those things out from the void, right? We kind of materialized them here from the void, from the primordial chaos, or whatever you prefer. And now we are kind of indebted. We are in debt in front of the void, if that's the expression in English. And thus, you know, debt is not a good thing, especially if you're in debt in front of the void, and, you know, every debt has to be repaid, or the creditor will go and will come and bite you in the ass, and it would be very bad for you to be bitten in the ass by the void. So we have to return at least partly what we've taken from the void back to the void, right? To at least partly repay our debt. So in this respect, I remember Nietzsche's words. Well, firstly, Nietzsche actually said something about sacrifice. He said that it comes from the mindset of abundance, and we'll definitely talk about this later in the video. But another thing he said about sacrifice, not actually sacrifice specifically, he said about the gratitude, right? So sacrifice in this sense that I just described to you, can be considered one of the forms of gratitude. But in Nietzschean terms, in terms of will to power, what is gratitude? It's essentially the same thing as revenge, but in a more classy way. So gratitude is the classy form of revenge. So when somebody does you harm, you do revenge and do harm to them. You say, no, like this blob of power that I am cannot be penetrated by another blob of power, you know, cannot be pressed upon, because I will retaliate. I would press upon you, right? My power is my power. You have power over me. You can press me, but I do have power over you. I can press you as well. But vice versa, like when somebody does you good things, they sort of also show that your well-being depends on them. So in some sense, they're showing that you are a little bit powerless, right? That at least partly your well-being is dependent on them. And in order to sort of make a reclamation to this, you show them gratitude. Perhaps if they give you a gift, you give them a gift in response, right? So you restore this balance of power. You say, not only does my well-being depend on you, your well-being also depends on me, right? So you restore this balance of power. So in this sense, gratitude is the form of revenge. So in this sense, a sacrifice is our revenge to the void, but more like a gratitude towards the void, right? Revenge in the Nietzschean sense, where we consider gratitude as the form of revenge. So in this sense, actually, we may say that sacrifice could be twofold. There are, like, if you wish, two forms of sacrifice. One form is sort of like a forward sacrifice, which would be an investment, if you wish, all right? And there is also this backwards form of sacrifice, which is essentially a revenge or gratitude or repayment, you know, something to that effect, where we are kind of returning the favor. We took those things from the void and we return them at least partly back into the void, right? To sort of repay our debt to the void. For the void so it doesn't come and bite us in the ass. And we'll talk about this sometime later in this video, about void biting our current civilization in the ass. I'm talking about the current crisis of meaning, but again, maybe in 5 to 10 minutes from now, we'll talk about this as well. So yeah, in this sense, in the sense of repayment, for example, charity might be considered this form of sacrifice, right? So a person becomes rich, but they realize that like they've taken those riches from the void, essentially, right? I mean, I'm speaking in sort of almost mystical sense, but I don't mean anything magical here, okay? It's just how like the basic mechanics of perception of power works, okay? So it just happened that somebody became rich, right? Even though they've actually made some effort towards this end and blah, 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 and blah, blah. Or maybe they didn't. Maybe they were born rich, etc., etc., etc. Doesn't really matter. What matters is they might use charity as this sort of form of repayment of this debt towards the void, right? Something to that effect. Basically, it would make them feel safer, right? In the sense that they wouldn't have this debt on them anymore. And I really apologize, like this sounds kind of mystical, but that's not what I mean. I really hope on some intuitive level you kind of understand what I mean. Like just try to assume that, for example, you became super rich, like suddenly, like tomorrow, right? Like you would feel there is some injustice in this, right? So you would feel insecure, like there is something, you know, and that's what I mean by being in debt, you know, in front of the void. Yeah. So, and obviously, by the way, I think I already said this in one of the videos, but I wouldn't be able to remember which. Anyway, the point was that obviously if you're doing charity, you should do it anonymously, right? Otherwise it would be just yet another form of vanity. You would be a Mr. Beast piece of shit, right? You wouldn't be an actual human being in this respect. Anyway, so I actually, like, I scoured my notes and I went like right into the middle, then right to the end. So I'm a little bit lost right now. So let me actually make the main statement of this video. And by the way, what you're watching right now is basically a motivational video in disguise. All right. So the main point I will make in this video is that sacrifice is actually what gives things value. This would be my main point, at least in our own eyes. Okay. So, and you might try to model what I will say right now. And what I will say right now is that when we invest a part of ourselves, like in the form of our effort or our time or our attention or our energy, you know, into something or someone, then this something or someone becomes valuable to us. Okay. So once again, I repeat, sacrifice is what gives things value in our eyes, right? So, yeah. And actually, I really liked this take of Jordan Peterson. By the way, watch my video, a really old one about Jordan Peterson. That was at the time of Peterson hype, some years ago. So his point was that, like sacrifice is kind of tied to this connection to the future, right? That would be, bring us to this, first forwards type of sacrifice that I talked about, sacrifice as an investment, right? So Peterson says that, sacrifice connects us to the future in the sense that you can't have a better future unless you sacrifice something today, which basically means unless you invest something into the future, right? You wouldn't have it in the future. Kind of, you know, kind of like an easy to understand idea. Actually, you can understand it purely economically, right? So whatever surplus of future happiness that we'll have, I mean, the happiness in the sense of like goods and services, roughly speaking, right? Resources, is the happiness that we are saving today, right? And that's kind of the idea, which is understood. And I mean, it's a valid idea, right? So in the very basis of the economic theory, you might say the idea of sacrifice is there, right? Not modern Keynesian, aka socialistic economic theory, which, remember what it says? What Keynes said? In the long run, we're all dead. What does that mean? Let's not make sacrifices. Let's not make investments. Let's spend as much as we can today, right? This is the modern socialistic monetary / economic theory, Keynesianism, right? Or neo-Keynes, or whatever the bullshit term they have today. It's all socialistic anyway, right? It all has no future by design, because again, in the long run, we're all dead. Let's not make any sacrifices. Let's not invest anything. Or we'll invest into bubbles just to get rich right now, right? Look at the AI investment bubble, for example. Anyway, we're digressing heavily. Let's try to return to the topic of sacrifice. So, again, the idea of agriculture is tied to the idea of sacrifice, right? You have to, like, put the seeds today in order to get the harvest some months later, right? That's a sacrifice, right? You could have eaten those grains today, but then you wouldn't have a harvest and you would starve later, right? Yeah, that's exactly what Peterson is saying in this respect, that the sacrifice is essentially an investment, right? But as I've said, you can also perceive the sacrifice in another dimension, so to speak, as a form of repayment. So that will be kind of a backward sacrifice with respect to this forward sacrifice, aka investment. Anyway, I kind of want to tie this idea to the general idea of meaning and order, right? Again, I reference my video, Perpendicular Worlds, where I talk about the world of physics, aka our world, right? And the world of our observable world, tangible one, and the world of meaning, aka spiritual world, roughly speaking, the world of ideas. So a simplistic idea would state that an increase in order requires an increase in chaos, or something to that effect. Like, there should be some balance between the two. And in this sense, again, if we've taken something from the void, we've increased the order, we have to get it, like, throw at least partly it back to the void that is, just spent chaotically, right? Get rid of these resources that we've obtained, kind of unjustly, right? Yeah. So if you want to increase the order, you also kind of need to increase chaos. I know it sounds stupid, but anyway, that's the idea. Basically, you need to suffer in order to receive pleasure, if that makes sense. You need to invest right now to get a return in the future. And I know, like, suffering for getting pleasure in the future sounds like a stupid argument. It's kind of like hitting yourself with a hammer on a hand, like, so that right now you feel pain, and then the pain recedes and you kind of feel relief from this, right? A form of enjoyment, if you wish, right? Just the disappearance of the pain. But that's not what I'm saying, okay? I'm saying that the suffering actually needs to be meaningful. It should be aimed towards your goal, right? As I told you, it's a motivational video in disguise, right? So, to quote Robert Fripp, it is impossible to achieve the aim without suffering. But again, I reiterate, as Eugene the philosopher, that the suffering must be meaningful. It should be aimed towards the goal. So Fripp says it is impossible to achieve the aim without suffering, but you have to at least have this aim and move towards it, right? Then you can suffer productively, so to speak. Then you can sacrifice to the correct gods and in a correct manner, as an ancient Greek might have said to you, right? Or something to that effect. So it should be a necessary suffering. Think about the game design, by the way. The thought just dawned on me. Like, a game is only interesting, returning to my idea that sacrifice is what gives things value, right? You only value the game if the gains, that the victory in the game is achieved through suffering, right? You have to commit. You have to actually play it with your effort and your time and energy and attention, right? Then, if you spend all that in the game, the victory becomes valuable to you, right? Because if the victory is too easy, you don't even have to spend any energy, time, or attention. If you win anyway, the game is not interesting. You wouldn't play, right? Yeah. So, as you can see, even things like games can only, the victory in them and the process of playing by proxy is only valuable because you sacrifice something for it. This is at least one example. It's not a foolproof, of course, and it's not a foolproof by the same token, but it's at least an example of what I'm saying, that sacrifice is what gives things value. In this particular case, games. Anyway, you might say, well, so if I need to, roughly speaking, spend something to get value, well, what do I do if I don't have anything to spend? And I would say it's a big illusion that you don't have anything to spend. Like, I was thinking about those things, like, you know, some people could argue that, oh, you know, ancient Greeks, they sacrificed, yes, but we can't afford something like this, right? We're like, the world is poor, we're starving, blah, blah, blah. No, we aren't. Like, look at how much stuff we're throwing away, actually. Just physically, I mean, in a very literal, pragmatic sense. Like, regarding food, for example, we're throwing out at least 1/3 of all the food that we produce in the world. Can you imagine that? So, we might as well have literally sacrificed it like the ancient Greeks did, and it would be absolutely fine. You know? Like, yeah. That's a world average. That's what I'm saying. It's not just for the rich countries. So, we live in a world of abundance right now. At least on average. And of course, I understand all the problems with averaging, blah, 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 but spare me all this stupid discussion, you know. Like, at least if you're watching this video, I can guarantee that you're in upper half of humanity in terms of abundance, okay? Like, consider the fact that 10% of people don't even have access to electricity. And you obviously do, since you can watch this, okay? Yeah. Yeah. So, it would be fruitful, let's put it this way. I would try to not use structures like we should or whatever, because who am I to say what we should and what we shouldn't? It would be fruitful, that's what I would say, to have this abundance mindset, because it's a world of abundance, okay? Like, and again, returning to what I said previously, what we can sacrifice really is our energy, time, and attention. And like, whatever you do, whoever you are, everybody has the same amount of time per day, okay? So, you know, if one person can sacrifice a certain amount of time per day, chances are you can also do that, you know? Well, it depends on their responsibilities, obviously, but, well, at least some you can sacrifice, you know? Everybody has at least some time to sacrifice. It's just maybe you're, like, stuffing various unnecessary stuff into your day that kind of blocks your ability to sacrifice this time for something better. Well, that's a whole separate issue, right? You can just, I mean, what's the best tool to realize how much time you actually have is to sit still for 5 minutes. Like, if you're a modern person, I guarantee you that if you try to do that on the second minute, you'll start going crazy, right? It's very hard to do, actually, today. So, yeah. And you will realize how long 5 minutes are, actually, right? It's just that you keep stuffing shit into your every 5 minutes of your life. And by the way, if you look at how little time we actually have in this life, I know I sound very silly, but I mean, who cares, really? But just think about this. 1 billion seconds. You would think that's not a whole lot, but that's more than 30 years. So human lifetime is like 2, maximum 3 billion seconds. It's not a whole lot, you know, if you think about it in this dimension. 3 billion seconds, that's 90 plus years, 93, something like that, you know, 94 more like, but close enough, you know. It's more like 2, actually, 2.5 maybe, you know, depending on your country, your state of health. But yeah, scary stuff if you think about this, right? Even more so, you kind of have to, memento mori, you know, think about what you're doing with your life. But that's way too silly. Let's go on a digression, actually, since we're getting into the super silly realm. Let's talk about something different. So in my video, Brief History of the Church, I talked about the history of Catholic Church, aka Church of the Mediterranean, aka Universal Church, that was founded sometime in 1300s, so that will be about 700 years ago, by Moses, aka Maimonides, and how it later how Christianity appeared about 500 years ago, right? So what's the main difference between, okay, there are many differences, but what is at least one important difference between the Universal Catholic Church and the Christian Church? The difference is that the Catholic Church used to make sacrifices, right? Before it Christianized in 16th century and later. And the Christian Church has no sacrifices, right? So the idea is that you can actually distinguish pre-Christian temples of like 1400s and 1500s from Christian temples from like late 1500s and later by the what's the word? The existence, I guess. There is a better word, but I can't find it. The existence of the altar where the sacrifice is made, okay? So in case you don't know, Europe is in the part of the earth where the prevailing winds are westerlies, right? So they blow from west to east, which means that when you're making the sacrifice, when you're burning, for example, the lamb on Easter, which was the main celebration in Catholic Church, the sacrificial lamb that is burning, this smoke, you have to get rid of it somehow, right? And if the prevailing wind is from the west to the east, you would better build your church in such a way that the altar is in the easternmost section, right? So that, in that way, the smoke would be removed from the church right away by the wind that goes to the east. So if the altar is at the easternmost edge of your building, then the smoke can be removed right away. Otherwise, it will go into the church itself, right? If you have the altar in the western wing, then the smoke would fill the whole church, right? But if you put it in the eastern section, then it goes away. So this would explain why in the Europe specifically, the churches are oriented, right? What does orient means? It means east. So that's why their altars are in the eastern sections, to remove the smoke. It is all very practical, as you can see, right? There's nothing, it is sacred in the sense that it's a place of sacrifice. It's the altar that, like, literally the elevated, the high thing, the hieros, in Greek. But it's also very practical, right? So, yeah. What I was saying is that Christian churches don't need altars, right? So they only have, like, maybe sometimes in newer Christian churches there are altars which are just like for the sake of tradition. But most likely, if you see a Christian church with an altar, especially in the eastern part, for example, Notre Dame de Paris, right? The Notre Dame Church in Paris, cathedral. It's a classic pre-Christian design. It has it's slightly tilted to the south, but the altar is in the eastern part, like slightly southeastern, right? Because it's not strictly west to east, but it's slightly tilted. Could be actually related to the local rules of winds in Paris. I actually don't know. Then again, we don't really know how the wind pattern changed since its construction, so it's kind of hard to tell. But the pattern is there. So that's why the altars are in the eastern parts, to remove the smoke that you get during the sacrifice, right? When you're burning the stuff. And that's why these churches are pre-Christian, right? So you have this apse, like this circular sort of niche where the altar would be. And then the smoke would be kind of released through the windows or whatever. Yeah. So this was a slight digression. So you can compare, by the way, we're still in the digression, you can compare Notre Dame, which is pre-Christian, to, for example, Sacré-Cœur Basilica, also in Paris, which was built in 1914, completed at least. Started building in 1875, I think. So a very late church, definitely Christian. So it's actually oriented, even though the word orient means east, north-south, right? And it has no altar. So there you go. That's a difference between a Christian and a pre-Christian church. The pre-Christian one has the altar in the eastern section to remove the smoke. Christian church does not need an altar in the first place. Okay? Yeah. So Catholics were making sacrifices because they were essentially polytheistic. Not really, but kind of, Easter sacrifice was obviously to the God, the monotheistic one. But there could have been others to other gods as well, maybe. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. But the difference is there. The sacrifice itself, right? The very existence of such. So yeah, that's how we, I managed to tie my video about the church to the video about sacrifice. Good thing. Anyway, let's return to the main topic of the video and let me reinforce my point once again. And the point is, it is my theorem, if you wish, that any meaning and any value requires sacrifice. Therefore, unless you are ready to make a sacrifice, no meaning and no value could appear in your life. But luckily, it actually works both ways. So, if you are ready to make a sacrifice, then both meaning and value can appear in your life. Voila! So, right now, you might just, you may sit down and think, like, what can I sacrifice to get some value and meaning? And again, the best way to do it is just to try to sit still for like 5 minutes. If 5 minutes is too short, though I don't think it is, try 10, okay? And you'll immediately recognize that you have a whole bunch of time to sacrifice, okay? You're just spending it on various bullshit usually. And why am I saying it? It's not because I'm some sort of guru. It's because I do that. I spend all of my time on absolute complete bullshit, honestly. So I'm actually talking to myself in this video, mostly. Anyway, let's return to this issue about the void kissing, not kissing, sorry. That could have been a Freudian slip. What was the word? Biting. The void biting us in the ass. So, my video about depopulation, how is it called? Why don't we have children anymore? Something like this. Link in the description. So, I was arguing that the depopulation crisis actually stems from the very idea of modernity, right? AKA the lack of meaning. It's not like the idea of modernity was the lack of meaning. It's more like the consequence of the philosophy of modernity is the lack of meaning. And in case you don't know what philosophy of modernity is, it's essentially individualism, okay? And it started in the late 1600s. So, second half of 17th century. So yeah. So, essentially the seeds of current processes were put in the soil back then. We're kind of rhyming the topic of agriculture, right? The seed and the harvest, the sacrifice and the reward, etc., etc. Kind of interesting. Anyway, why is that the case? Well, because people aren't ready to make sacrifices, would be my point. That's why we have the crisis of meaning in current civilization, right? Because it is all the current civilization that is about gaining stuff. And I would argue, again, returning to my point about repaying the debt to the void, right? Again, there's no mysticism in what I'm saying. I'm just using it for simplicity. There should be, okay, let's try not to use the words as should. It would be cool, if there would be some sort of give/take balance, right, in the world. At least that seems like a reasonable idea, let's put it this way. And the civilization of modernity, that's kind of the problem, is all skewed towards taking, not giving, right? It's, again, Keynesianism is a perfect example of this in the realm of economics, where it says, let's just take everything we can right now. Forget about the future, right? So yeah, the socialistic economics of Keynes, it's all about taking. And I'm not really advocating for, some sort of economic revolt. What I'm saying is, you can influence your own life in this respect, at the very least, right? So, again, let's return to the basics. Like, if we assume that everything in the world is for us to take, then we arrive at the crisis of meaning. Because then we can't make sacrifices, because why would we? The world is here for us to take. But once you realize that it's probably not a good idea, and maybe we should maintain this balance of giving and taking, we took good stuff from the void, and we need to return good stuff to the void to take, to trade with the void, if you wish, okay? To trade with future, with chaos, because future is chaos, essentially. Future is unwritten, as, Joe Strummer said. So we trade with the void. We take stuff from chaos, we have to return it back to chaos, right? So we have to make sacrifices. We have to give in order to be able to take. And that's the best thing about this, is that giving actually produces meaning. Once again, I return to my theorem, to what I said at the beginning, that sacrifice is what gives things value. If you don't return stuff into the void, you don't value things you receive from the void, right? And by void, you can mean whatever, you know, the world, if you wish. Yeah. And once again, I have to reiterate that we are incredibly rich, all of us. We all have the time, the energy, the attention. You just have to enter this sort of sacrificial mindset, the mindset of abundance. I have a lot of things to return to the void. I have a lot of things to share, to trade, right? Like, what can I trade for these 10 minutes of my time that I will sacrifice right now? That should be the question. Again, we use should. It would be nice to ask yourself this question. That's how I would formulate this. All right, yeah. So we have abundance as the input, when you realize how much you can actually sacrifice. And as the output, as a trade for this sacrifice, you have value or meaning. Okay? Isn't this crazy? Like, how is this still legal, you know? Yeah. Only rich people can sacrifice a lot, you might say. But you can sacrifice a lot, in fact, as much as you want. Therefore, essentially, through this sacrificial mindset, you learn that you are as rich as you want to be. Essentially, as much as you are ready to sacrifice, sorry, my English is failing me a little bit. You are as rich as much as you're willing to sacrifice. Does that make sense? Probably, right? Hopefully you understood what I wanted to say. Yes, you are as rich as you are ready to sacrifice. Something like that. As much. There could have been the word much somewhere. I don't know. Yeah. Hopefully you got the idea. So, let's bring back sacrifice. Yeah. Any meaning and any value requires sacrifice. That's my theorem. Thank you for watching. The eons are closing.
If you wish to support me, please consider joining my Patreon. That is patreon.com/philosopher. See the link in the description. Or if you have a scientific theory of your own and you'd like my help in developing it, please join my alternative science coaching program, also available through Patreon.